The voice of sharing Durian ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Durian ASEAN. You're with Gowri here today on your ASEAN Daily for this Thursday morning. And of course, I'm here to bring you news from all over Southeast Asia. And kicking off our news for today is a U.S. envoy to Thailand being investigated for royal defamation. Now, we all know that Thailand is kind of notorious for clamping down on freedom of speech, and that nothing can ever be said against the royals or even the prime minister of the country. But this time, they're not only doing that to their own citizens, they're doing it to the U.S. ambassador to Thailand, who is currently facing a police investigation for royal defamation after criticizing jail terms under the draconian law as the ultra-nationalist sentiment surges since royalist generals seize power. And under the Thai law, anyone who is convicted of insulting the king, the queen, the heir, or anyone pretty much in the royal family can face up to 15 years in jail. And prosecutions have actually soared since the army took over the country and sort of became the ruling government since last year. And so far, there's been record-breaking sentences handed down, especially in recent months. Most of them are those regime critics who speak out against the military government, who speak out against some old-fashioned laws that they think is not relevant anymore and should not really be in place. And also includes some senior officials swept up in kind of vague corruption probes. And the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand said it has been asked to cooperate in the probe against U.S. Ambassador Glenn Davis, and police are probing whether the speech he delivered to international media last month at the club violated the Article 112 of the Criminal Code, which is, of course, the very famous lèse-majesté law. And the senior Thai police source confirmed also to AFP that they have received a complaint, and that is why they were investigating the ambassador's comments. And in a wide-ranging talk, Davis heaped praise on the Reverend but ailing 88-year-old Thai King Bhumibol, and he also expressed concern at unprecedented prison sentences handed down by Thai military courts against civilians for the alleged lèse-majesté. And we believe that no one should be jailed for peacefully expressing their views, and we strongly support the ability of individuals and independent organizations to research and report on important issues without fear of retaliation. A video of this speech is available on FCCT's YouTube site. And in Thailand, any member of the public can make any allegation against the royal family, and they will be investigated. And of course, there's been a lot of critics speaking out against this and saying that the situation often results in sort of like witch hunting led by ultra-nationalist volunteers who actually comb through the social media and public events, just deliberately looking for comments or any instances at all that shows a possible breach of law so that they can complain and get this person to be investigated or to be jailed accordingly. And in the recent years, it has been increasingly this activity has been increasing, and even historians have found themselves facing complaints, often filed by these ultra-nationalists over their writings on past Thai monarchs. And all the Thai-based media must heavily be self-censored when reporting on the monarchy and even convictions under the lèse-majesté law for fear of falling foul of the law. And of course, Ambassador Davis's comments centered on criticism of the royal defamation law, but not the royal family itself. He spoke more than an hour at the club on Washington's long-standing relationship with Thailand, saying that Washington respected and admired Bhumibol. But of course, he is still criticizing the law, and also the convictions that happened under the lèse-majesté law. And as of now, the U.S. Embassy could not be reached for official comment, so wait and see if there's any update on this. Moving on to Indonesia, they are having some regional elections to bring change, and their General Elections Commission (KPU) said that voting throughout the 264 regencies, cities, and provinces was conducive and peaceful. Tens of millions of Indonesians went to the polls on Wednesday to elect regional leaders in the country's first ever simultaneous elections. And the day before Indonesians were due to go to the polls, the KPU announced that voting in 5 areas would be postponed. This is due to the ongoing legal processes, and also because the date for the elections have not yet been decided. And voting continues in a majority of the places. And according to this place in Ogan-Lir, South Sumatra, nearly 300,000 residents cast their votes to choose their local leaders for the next 5 years. Voters hope that the new government will be able to do more to ensure a greater protection of their health. And health seems to be on top of the list here, and we're not surprised given the recent haze that happened, and Indonesia's PSI level was way beyond 300. And in the past, of course, forest fires rarely ever happened, but in the recent years, instead of progressing, instead of making things better, forest fires are becoming a seasonal occurrence, and every year there will definitely be such fires, and it's such a pity that the local government does not really pay enough attention to it when it's probably the most grave problem in the country. The local government is supposed to able to be to anticipate, tackle, prevent, and question why this happens every year, according to Dandi Pradana, a resident of Ogan-Lir. And Ogan-Lir election candidate Noviani Mawardi has claimed victory based on the quick count of results. She's also a member of, he is also a member of the Regional Legislative Council. He said that he would continue to work closely with his rivals. And the general elections will also be announcing the official results for regencies and cities on December 18, with results at provincial level to be announced a day later. And then I think there's a lot of things that need to be fixed about in Indonesia, and one of them is definitely the haze problem, because it's affecting the health, and that is the biggest concern among the citizens in Indonesia. And still in Indonesia, we have an issue of human rights, where a survey shows that President Jokowi has not quite been living up to his promises to improve the state of human rights in the country. And, the results shown at the survey was not quite surprising, according to Setara Institute Deputy Chairman Bona Tigor Naisposas, because he said the human rights issues have evidently not been a priority in the Jokowi Yusuf Kala administration. And also, according to them, the promise made during the election campaign was not reflected in a number of government documents, including the National Midterm Development Plan, the National Plan of Action and Human Rights, and also the Government Working Plan. And it also was not outlined in Jokowi's Nawacita 9 agenda. And also development principles, and also the failure to set up a special commission on past human rights abuses that was initially postponed. A study which was concluded from November 5th to December 5th involved 215 respondents in 19 provinces. I think this definitely puts a lot of pressure on Jokowi. We know that it's a huge country, definitely not an easy responsibility, but human rights is a very pressing and urgent issue in Indonesia, all over Southeast Asia, really. But since he promised from the start that human rights will be something that he will be looking at. It will be on top of his priority list. And he also promised that the state of human rights will be improving. I think that he should be more proactive about it. And human rights issues that the survey rated include death penalty, with the country's score on this seeing the biggest drop in the past year, from a recorded 2.18 in 2014 down to 1.99 in 2015. We do know that the death penalty is also something that we've been trying to get President Jokowi to stop, but he still believes that that is a good solution. But they also concluded that there have been some improvements, as in rise in economic, social and cultural rights. And the study also showed that Jokowi was leaning too much towards infrastructure development while neglecting basic human rights issues. That'll be all for our first part. Stay tuned. I'll be back with some political news. I'll be back with some economy news from Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, and I'm here to bring you more news from all over Southeast Asia. And I'm moving on to the economic part. We have one from Singapore, where interest grows in securities-based crowdfunding in Singapore. Rewards-based crowdfunding has been one of the more popular methods in recent years. However, instead of products, investors are increasingly asking for a share in companies that they support. And going into the news, crowdfunding, an alternative form of financing for startups, has opened the door to product development for many young companies. Rewards-based crowdfunding, where the backers receive a small reward or prototype for their support, has been one of the more popular methods in the recent years, especially with global platforms such as the Kickstarter and Indiegogo. However, instead of products, investors are increasingly asking for a share in companies they support. Ever since Facebook snapped up the crowdfunded virtual reality tech company Oculus in a multi-billion-dollar deal last year, a lot of backers are starting to realize that there may be more to gain than just getting a cool product. And since then, crowdfunding has evolved to include securities such as debt, equity. This movement is slowly filtering into Asia, and Singapore's status as a financial hub has caught the eye of global crowdfunding players such as Sweden's Funded by Me, Israel's Our Crowd, which hope to set up in Singapore soon. It's also a huge wealth management center with over $1 trillion under management, said Mr. John Medved, the CEO of Our Crowd. So that combination of both infrastructure and climate, in terms of business, entrepreneurial zest, and wealth management, makes a perfect location for our kind of exclusive crowdfunding. So Singapore is a natural choice, and we're talking to potential partners as well as regulatory authorities, and hope we will be able to set up a very productively here early next year. And in line with recent trends as well, Singapore Central Bank has issued a consultation paper seeking industry views on measures to facilitate and regulate such securities-based crowdfunding in Singapore. And even as that is ongoing, some local players are keen to position themselves as quickly as possible. The crowdfunding platform FundNel, which was set up March this year, is already in 4 countries, and it offers a variety of security-based crowdfunding, but particularly is bullish about equities, pending the Monetary Authority of Singapore's regulations. As a concept, of course, they want people to get to know the company first, believe in the sector of concept or theme that the company is in before looking at the instrument. The reason why they choose equity over other types of instruments is mostly because they feel like there might be a potential upside in this format. And according to global research report, Asia was the biggest region by crowdfunding volume, raising close to 3.4 billion US dollars in 2014, and by 2016 they expect that number to go up and could hold more funding than today's entire venture capital industry. And from there, let's move on to Japan's interest in Vietnam. Apparently, the Japanese are bringing in a lot of agricultural firms to put down roots in Vietnam market. And we know that Vietnam has been getting a lot of attention economically recently. They've been opening up their markets a lot. They're bringing in a lot of investors, and they're also said to be the one to benefit the most from TPP, and then 6 major companies from Japan showcase their agricultural sector and their products such as seeds, fertilizers, and machinery at an exhibition in Ho Chi Minh City. And these Japanese producers are looking to boost their exports as the Japanese yen has weakened. And also with an aging population, it's a bit more difficult for Japan to maintain agricultural activities. So expanding overseas seems like a good option at the moment for Japan. And with many regions whose climate with many regions in Vietnam where they have climate similar to Japan's, Vietnam has caught the attention of these Japanese businesses. And of course, the Vietnamese government has been looking at ways to attract more foreign investors in agriculture, which is long considered as an underperformer in attracting capital flows. And also, Yasutoyo Murakami, who is the chairman of fertilizer producer in Hyponex Japan Corporation, said in the newspaper that Vietnam will be its base in Southeast Asian market, and they're also looking for a location to establish a factory here as part of its cost-cutting strategy. And earlier this year, also 2 other Japanese companies publicly expressed their intentions to set up businesses in Myanmar. Looks like Vietnam is on its way to becoming the next big thing in ASEAN, and also they're definitely stepping up their game and being more and more competitive. So we'll have to look out for Vietnam as the next power in the house. That's all from the economy side. Stay tuned. I'll be back with the last part of ASEAN Daily, which is the arts and culture side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Hello, welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're still with Gowri here on your ASEAN Daily, and I'm moving on to the last part of our ASEAN Daily for today, which is the arts and culture. And we'll be talking a bit about environment as well, since the COP21 is happening and it's also really hot at the moment. We'll also be speaking to someone a bit later on the updates on COP21, so stay tuned for that one. And so back to our news. China is accused of blocking progress at the Paris climate talks. As Beijing declared its first red alert for heavy smog this week, closing schools and curbing car use, Chinese negotiators at UN talks in Paris are being accused of trying to weaken the new global climate accord due to be finalized by Friday. Of course, it is very frustrating, said one negotiator from a developed country after a meeting where he said Chinese officials had tried to water down efforts to create a common system for the way countries report to the UN on their carbon dioxide emissions and climate change plans. Another envoy said that Chinese delegates were also resisting a measure widely seen as crucial for a successful accord, which is a requirement for countries to update the pledges they have made to limit their emissions, preferably every 5 years from around 2020. China is supporting a general stock-taking review of countries' pledges every 5 years, but wants any updating of the carbon dioxide emissions reduction targets contained in these plans to be voluntary, the envoy said. Of course, the reduction of carbon dioxide is also high on the list today because it is an invisible greenhouse gas that differs from the soot and smog choking Beijing but the two pollutants typically come from the same sources, such as coal-fired power plants. Beijing's negotiating stance caused anxiety among many delegates on Tuesday as the Paris talks intensified ahead of Friday's deadline, partly because India was expected to be a bigger obstacle to a successful agreement. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was also there, weighed in on one of the most divisive issues of the conference on the eve of the two-week meeting, writing into the Financial Times that wealthy countries powered their way to prosperity on fossil fuels, had a moral duty to lead the fight against climate change, and that sounds perfectly reasonable. In contrast, however, Chinese President Xi Jinping had garnered public credit for a series of bold climate vows in the run-up to the Paris meeting, and he had also made a rare joint announcement with U.S. President Barack Obama on Beijing's plan to combat global warming late last year, and subsequently pledged to launch a national carbon trading system 2017. We'll be discussing this more in depth later at 9 o'clock, so if you want to know about COP21 and what's happening in Paris, please listen into that interview. And moving on from there, we have it's called the Light of ASEAN Unity, where you can expect a dazzling display of millions of light bulbs in Mind's Wellness City in Sri Kembangan. Of course, this is in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And what's happening here is that there will be a lot of lanterns on display, a lot of millions of light bulbs representing countries from all over Southeast Asia, and this is the brainchild of Country Heights Holdings founder and Deputy Chairman Tan Sri Lee Kim Yu. The inaugural lantern and music show seeks to ride on the solidarity forged after the recently concluded ASEAN Summit in Malaysia. And of course, visitors can expect a dazzling display, millions of light bulbs along with 5-story tall lanterns at the Unity ASEAN Lantern and Music Show beginning this Friday. And the Unity ASEAN Lantern and Music Show will run from December 11 to February 22nd next year at the Mind's Wellness City. So be sure to check out that one. So that'll be all from me today. Leave your comments on Facebook and Twitter. Just look for Durian ASEAN. Also follow us on YouTube for all the daily podcast. Follow us on Instagram and download our very own Durian ASEAN app so you can listen to us anytime, anywhere.